with 5 commandments on one tablet, 5 commandments on the other. The tradition of the time, this is something of a treaty between God and his people. The tablets would contain a full copy of each treaty, so that there would be one for each party, right? And so one copy would be for Moses and the Israelites, and the other copy would be held in the Ark of the Covenant before God. And you'll notice this is quite famous. All the thou shalt nots, right? That's what people remember about the 10 Commandments. Don't do this and don't do that. There's a lot of people who think that that's what Christianity is all about too. Let's move on there. And it's interesting when you actually sit down and count the words in the Old Testament, which I did not do. Thank goodness for Google. You can Google this and you can find out how many words there are in the Old Testament, and you can find out how many words there are in the books of Moses, the law of the Old Testament. You will find it's about a quarter. It's about 26% of the Old Testament is law, telling you precisely what to do. And I guess you guys have been studying Leviticus on Wednesday night, so you are very familiar with all of the very specific rules and regulations of Israelite life. Let's look at a couple of these here. Let's go ahead with that one. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. There's an important one. A lot of different ideas about what that might refer to. Some people think it might be something to do with some sort of pagan ritual at the time, that this was a thing that they would do for idols, something like that. There's another one here. You shall not sow your field with 2 kinds of seed, nor shall you wear a garment of cloth made of 2 kinds of material. Honestly, I don't know what that one's all about, but there it is. How about another one here? This is the law when someone dies in a tent. Everyone who comes into the tent and everyone who is in the tent shall be unclean 7 days. There you go. If you want to be ritually clean, you're going to have to avoid anybody dying in a tent. And then you shall not muzzle an ox when it is treading out the grain. So the law of Moses, there's great stuff in the law of Moses, and then there's this kind of weird stuff that makes us think, what in the world is going on? So, example, back to our young goat in the mother's milk. Take that literally, and it's pretty easy to understand what we're talking about here. You don't put a goat in its mother's milk and boil it, yeah? But did you know that this was taken up by the rabbis? And the rabbis are the successors of the Pharisees of the New Testament. And the rabbis decided, well, if you can't, and that's obviously wrong. Let's go ahead and mark that as wrong. There we go. If you can't have a goat and milk together, then that means dairy products and meat cannot be consumed together. So that means no more cheeseburgers. And it's true. I looked it up just to be sure about that. And it is true. Cheeseburgers are still not kosher. You cannot, if you are an observant Jew, you are not supposed to be eating cheeseburgers because of that law right there. Don't boil a young kid in its mother's milk, because you shouldn't eat dairy and meat together, which is a shame because I love a good cheeseburger. Anyway, but this kind of illustrates one approach to the law of Moses, right? And that approach would be this law that is given to us is a checklist of righteousness. If you want to be right with God, you got to be able to tick all the boxes and check off everything on the list to make sure that you have done everything correctly and that it's all correct. And then you can be right with God. This is the way of righteousness, right? And the guys who would take the law and sort of figure out all this stuff about, you can't have cheeseburgers, those were in the New Testament called lawyers. They are the lawyers. And they pop up a couple of times in the New Testament. And one of the times, Jesus gets invited to a party. Jesus always was good for a party. You notice that in the New Testament? He's always, you want to have dinner? Let's go. And it doesn't matter if it's the town leper throwing the party or if it's the town Pharisee. So he goes to the Pharisees' party, and at the Pharisees' party, it does not go well. He starts pronouncing woe on the Pharisees, and then the lawyers are like, hey, man, you're insulting us too. And this is what he says to them. Woe to you lawyers too, for you load people with burdens hard to bear, and you yourselves do not touch the burdens with one of your fingers. Woe to you lawyers, for you have taken away the key of knowledge. You did not enter yourselves, and you hindered those who were entering. Tough words. So for Jesus, that way of righteousness is dead. It's bankrupt. If you're only ever concerned with making sure that you're doing exactly whatever commandment tells you to do, and you never stop to think about anything else, then you've missed the point of the law and the covenant that God made with Israel. And I find that absolutely the most remarkable thing. Because, of course, Israel is famous for keeping the law, right? That's what they do. After they finally get carried away off into Babylon, they finally decide, maybe we should be serious about this whole keeping the law business. Well, good job, guys. It's a little late now, but okay, good. And they get into it so much that they get down to this point where they're like, no, you can't have cheeseburgers. And you got to be able to, if you go out to the bush in front of your house and pick some spices for your stew, you got to be sure to tithe that to the temple. It was weird, right? And they got all this stuff. And then the lawyers were also the guys who decided, well, you can walk so far on the Sabbath, but if you walk any farther, that's work, and you're not allowed to do that. Or you can carry so much weight on the Sabbath, but if you carry too much more than that, then that's work, and you can't do that, and that's forbidden on the Sabbath. The lawyers are the ones that made it weird when Jesus would go and heal on the Sabbath, right? And they were the one, and everybody would gasp and go, "Are you supposed to be doing that? Isn't that kind of work?" And Jesus is like, "No, of course not. That's not the point of the law. If your understanding of the law is only ever a checklist to keep yourself righteous, you've missed the point." All right, so what does Jesus think about the law? Well, this is straight out of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5. You've heard it was said, do not murder. And whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother is liable to judgment. Another one, same passage. You have heard it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. I don't know about you guys, but that makes me feel real uncomfortable, real fast. Uh-oh. Yeah. Again, you have heard it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. Now, does that mean that you can't go into court and swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but? I don't think that's what that means. What I think Jesus is saying here is, why do you have to take oaths? Because you lie. That's why. If you don't lie and people know that you don't lie, then it doesn't matter. You don't need to take an oath because they'll just know, oh yeah, he doesn't lie. Just take his word for it, right? So for Jesus here, the law, it's not about ticking a box, right? It's not about, well, I spent another week at work and managed to not murder that idiot in the cubicle next to me, so I'm good, I'm righteous, check the not murder box. Or, that cute girl at that shop I go to, I didn't rape her today, so check that box, I'm good there. That is not it, Jesus says. That's totally the opposite of what it should be, right? Now, what's interesting about this passage is there's a lot of scholars out there. Let's call them critical scholars. They are people who read the Bible in a very critical fashion, and they will tell you that in this passage, Jesus is essentially rewriting the Old Testament law. He is changing what God said and giving it a totally different meaning than what it meant in its original context. And you know what? Jesus says in that very same passage this: "Do not think I have come to abolish the law or prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Jesus is not rewriting the law. He is not giving you something completely new. He is telling us what that law was supposed to be like and was supposed to be about in the first place, right? This is not a matter of just managing to not kill somebody or managing not to commit adultery or managing, well, I didn't lie today, so I guess I'm good. That's not it, right? So for Jesus then, he doesn't just want us to do better. He wants us to be better people. He wants, the law is sort of like the outer boundary of what is good, right? And by being, fitting into that minimal requirement, that bare minimum of what it is to be righteous, it's supposed to draw us in closer to the covenant God of Israel, right? And that's such a major part of his ministry. And when you look at the Old Testament, you will see again and again places where Israel is called to love God, places where Israel is commanded to take care of people, right? They were told, do not harvest everything in your fields. Leave the edges. And that's for the poor people to be able to come in and get the food that they need. That was what Israel was supposed to be about. You read the book of Ruth, and you see the example of Boaz. Boaz is exactly what Israel was supposed to be. Boaz was someone who said, oh, you stay in my field, I'll make sure, I'll tell my workers you drop a little extra for Ruth. That was what Israel was supposed to be. Not, well, let's just leave an inch this time instead of 4 inches because I really need the food. That's wrong. That's the checklist righteousness, and that's a dead end. But for Boaz, it was about, throw some extra out there for her. I don't care. We'll have enough, and God will provide for us, and she needs the help. And what's scary about this whole process here, this whole thought process of the way Jesus approaches the law and the way the lawyers and the Pharisees approach the law, I think we're all like this. We all want to live in a world that is completely black and white, where we all know what's right and what's wrong, right? I don't want to have to think a lot about things. Just tell me what to do, right? So I was just in Maine on vacation with my wife. Good place to go, and she was giving me directions, and she says, you can go this road or you can go that road. It doesn't matter. And I'm like, I don't want to hear that. Just tell me what to do. Just tell me which way to go, right? That's how we are. We don't want to have to think too hard. We just want to just tell me what to do. And so we want to live in a world of black and white, right and wrong, clear as day, and no questions, right? And of course, that's the way we are as children, right? There's right and wrong, and it's easy when you're a kid. And then there are those folks, those voices in our culture who want to tell us there is no absolute right or wrong. It's all just shades of gray. Everything is a shade of gray. So there is no black and white, right and wrong. It is only, whatever works for you in that particular situation. As long as you don't hurt anybody else, then you should be fine. That's an interesting ethic, by the way, as long as you don't hurt anyone else. And I think to myself, how in the world am I going to know in any given circumstance that what I do is never, ever going to hurt anyone else? I have no idea. I don't know how to do that. I need to live in a world of grace, right? We desperately need, because we cannot live up to even the world's idea of what ethics ought to be. Make sure you don't hurt anybody. But the reality of our world is that we live in sort of a messy place, right? And it's not that there is no right and wrong. There is. There are absolute principles that are true for all time. No question about that. But there's this messy place where it's sometimes hard to figure out what the right road is going to be. What's the right path? And it may be that you can look at your Bible and you can say, well, it tells me not to murder people. That's good. But that doesn't give me a plan for dealing with the difficult people of my life. It just tells me, bare minimum, don't kill them. All right, fine. And likewise, don't lust and don't commit adultery. Bare minimum, how do I deal with feelings and thoughts and ideas that are, and especially if you go on any sort of social media, don't spend a lot of time there because good grief. Yeah. Yeah, right? So there's this messiness where there are right and wrong, no question about it, but it's not as simple as we wish it were. Now you might be wondering, where does it say that in the Bible? Good question. Let's give an example here. This is one of my most favorite passages as an adult, right? Proverbs 26:4-5. Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him yourself. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. Just tell me what to do. Should I answer the fool or not? And to make it worse, right? Those verses are right next to each other. They're 4 and 5. You read the one and then you read the other one right after it. It's right there. You have to use your head. And the Bible tells you there are good reasons for doing either one of those things. And sometimes the fool is leading people astray, and maybe you have to step out and make some kind of attempt at correcting the public record. And sometimes the fool is just making a fool of himself, and it's better to just let him do it, right? And that's it right there. So even the people who want to see black and white in the world and want to make it simple and want to make it easy so that we can just apply whatever to any situation, those folks still have to wrestle with that theme in the Old Testament, the theme of wisdom. And that is the theme of wisdom, by the way. That is the whole, you read through Proverbs and you're going to find all sorts of things. Another theme of Proverbs is poverty. And in some verses in Proverbs, poverty is a punishment for being lazy or foolish. And in other verses of Proverbs, you better take care of those poor people, because if you don't, God will judge you. So is poverty good or is poverty bad? Yes, it all depends, right? That's where wisdom comes in. That's why we need to find that way of wisdom. All right, well, what does this have to do with Core Academy? Yes, I am here not just to talk about wisdom and understanding, but I'm also here representing Core Academy, and I want to be able to tell you a little bit about what we do and what wisdom has to do with it. And that's pretty simple. Science makes things simultaneously better, but also profoundly more difficult, right? And it happens at the same time. So one of my, unfortunately, numerous hobbies is family genealogy and history. I like learning about my ancestors and what they did and where they were and all that sort of thing. And one of the things that I find as I'm looking at people living in the 1800s or the 1700s, you often find people who just die at young ages. Kids, you find graves of 6-year-olds and 4-year-olds. You find fathers dying off at 50, 55, my age, basically. And you think about these ancestors, and they're having a rough life because they lost a father, they lost a wife, they lost a kid. That's tough, because in the 1800s, the most effective treatment for disease that we had was prayer, right? It was up to the Lord to decide whether you lived or died. And now look what we have, right? We have somebody who's having problems this morning. We can have an ambulance come in, and they can take measurements right here on site and start to make a diagnosis of what's wrong and how they're going to treat her. It's amazing. It's amazing. But with that then, of course, comes the questions of, all right, well, when does it become appropriate to save a life, or am I just prolonging suffering? That didn't really used to be a thing. Before, it was all in God's hands. But now we have this power. And with the power comes, well, I don't want to go Spider-Man on you, but with great power comes great responsibility. And with great power comes you need wisdom to be able to use it. You need wisdom to be able to use it well. All right. So, a great example of this. Oh, yes, let's talk about COVID. How about that, right? We're all happy to hear about COVID still. Yeah. So on the one hand, you have the black and whiters with COVID who want to say we have to follow the science and that the wrong approach is just politics. Boy, I'm getting tired of hearing about that. Politics. It's just politics. Of course it's politics. That's public policy. That's the very thing we're trying to decide. So we can't just dismiss it as just politics, because that's what it is. So you have these folks, and then you have the other folks. Just use your common sense. You don't have to. Don't do a lot, right? Just use your common sense, and you'll be fine. And all those other people, those people are the politic people. And again, I think both extremes are probably not helpful, right? It's clear to us in retrospect, and I was afraid of this when we went into it, this whole idea of locking everything down, shutting down businesses, shutting down churches, shutting down restaurants, sticking people in their homes and keeping them there, that has an emotional and mental impact on our health. It just does. And I know the suicide rate went up when that happened. So yes, we might have prevented some people from dying from COVID, but we lost some people to depression and despair and isolation. And that's the way of wisdom, right? That's the way of wisdom. The way of wisdom says, okay, there's a cost to whatever we do, and we have to decide what's the right path forward. And there's no good solution in this situation, but there are lots of bad solutions. So let's figure out how we're going to do it, right? But unfortunately, we all want to go into the black and white approach. So some of the messy reality here. Science is not itself an ethical system. To say, let's follow the science, doesn't tell me anything, right? The science could just be, let's quarantine these people, or we could go full Nazi on them and send them to the gas chamber. Anybody who's infected goes to the gas chamber, and then we'll stop the spread that way. That would be absolutely horrifying, but that would be scientifically effective, right? You cannot just follow the science. The science doesn't tell you what is right or wrong. The science just gives you tools and information to be able to make decisions about what is right or wrong. But the ethics has to come from somewhere else. And unfortunately, common sense is not an ethical system either. The heart is deceitful, and it will deceive you and trick you. And you got to be real careful to make sure that when you're listening to your heart, that you're listening to the Holy Spirit speaking to you and not my selfish desire to just go on about my life as normal. And yes, you noticed this morning when we were singing and worshiping, I was wearing my mask, because I know as we sing, we're spraying stuff into the air, and I have not had COVID. My wife has had COVID. I have not had COVID. I am grateful for that, and I just want to do a bare minimum thing of wearing a mask so that I can lower my probability of getting COVID. That's it. And I don't know that that's common sense. That's something I learned from reading research about masks and having a background in biochemistry and knowing about how viruses spread and all that stuff. That's not common sense. That was learned. That's a learned behavior that I figured out. All right. And the next thing that I know, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, right? The fear of the Lord is the beginning. It's not the end, right? Just because I'm a Christian doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to be any better at running the government than anybody else. Maybe not. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. If I want wisdom, if I want to be an effective leader, then I need to be following the path and following the Lord, following the way of wisdom, because it is a journey. It is not a thing that I have. It's not a destination. Other things I know. There are absolute principles, yes, that apply in every situation. That's correct. And sometimes there is not a good way to apply any of them. COVID being a great example. We can do nothing and lots of people will die. We can lock everything down and lots of people will die. We can do a mix somehow and some people will die and some people won't die. I don't know. I'll tell you, thinking about my 83-year-old father and my 75-year-old mother still alive. I really wanted them masked up in church. And I encouraged them to do that. But I didn't encourage them to sit home and do nothing because that's depressing. Nobody wants to do that. But yes, there's some situations that we come to in the scientific world that don't have a good solution to them. And even though we have absolute principles that we shouldn't kill people, and that's a good principle to have, it isn't obvious how to proceed in certain circumstances that are very difficult. And yeah, so I've been talking about COVID, but we can talk about lots of other situations. Obviously, this issue of reproductive freedom and abortion and life. I am 100% on board with Roe v. Wade being a terrible legal decision. It was just not, it didn't make any sense. It still doesn't make any sense to me. But that doesn't change the fact that there are a million women a year so desperate that they are willing to end their pregnancies. And those women, that's probably not going to go away. And like I said, I'm really glad that we have crisis pregnancy centers across the country that provide resources for these women. So all of those, the pro-choice folks who are angry now and saying that we need to step up and do our share to help these people, guess what? We already are. And they are already providing resources like that for people in that situation. Environmental management is another issue that science influences. And I'm not just talking climate change and that debate. I'm talking pollution. I'm talking just the way we live our lives and the way we influence the environment around us. I interviewed for our podcast, Let's Talk Creation, I interviewed an ecologist from Truett McConnell University, and he told me he's more worried about plastic pollution than he is about climate change. That plastic pollution is something that we can do something about right here and now. And since he's told me that, I've become really conscious of how much plastic I bring into my house and throw right away, right? Nearly every piece of food that we get is wrapped in plastic, right? And it goes right to the landfill. And wow, do we need some minds to think about that? You better believe we need some minds to think about that. Of course, creation and evolution, this has a broader impact than you might think. There's lots of places in, especially medicine, where things that we've learned, things that evolutionary biologists have learned, seem to have some practical application. Viruses, for example. If you're tired of hearing about the Delta strain and the Omicron strain and whatever the next strain is, that's all because viruses change quickly and mutate. They just do. So to say no to evolution, okay, let's be specific about what we're saying no to, but also it's not as easy as just saying no to evolution. There's a whole world of science and application that's come out of research around evolutionary biology that might have very useful and practical results. And we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And then information and social media. This is really, I think, becoming the warfare of the 21st century. This is where war is fought. And if you wonder, and I've been wondering this, how in the world do the Russian people just go along with randomly invading a neighboring country because we want to? It's because one man basically controls all of the information that they see. And if you're thinking, nah, that wouldn't happen here, think again. I think it's already happening here, right? We are all captive to these little devices here. We're all looking at our social media feed. And what can we do? I don't like your opinion. Unfollow, unfriend. And now everybody in my feed thinks exactly the way I do, which keeps your blood pressure down. I'll grant you that. But it also starts to make you a little weird in the head. I was single for a very long time. I got married when I was 38, I think. Yeah, almost 40. And there were times as a single man living alone in my house, I just realized, it just became really apparent to me that my ways of thinking have become really distorted because I don't have to think about anybody else who might have another opinion whatsoever. I can do whatever I want and think whatever I want. And you know what? Now, what I experienced as a single man living alone, I'm seeing on a grand scale with people everywhere, looking at their phones and going, yeah, I like that. No, that's wrong. Unfollow. We've created this massive mental isolation. And you see it now where every time the ideologies clash, it's become violent. And it's kind of scary how powerful this information war is. Beware. Put your phone down. Trust me. Just put it down. Look at it. See, I took all the little, what do you call those, apps off my phone. The social media apps, I took them off my phone. So I don't get buzzes or bells or dings or whatever. Nobody tells me, and I don't have to look at it. So I decide when I'm going to look at Facebook or whatever. And yes, I have to use it for work. It's true. And yes, I do use it a little bit for fun. But yeah, I decide. I get to control that, not my phone. All right. So with crisis comes opportunity. And this for me is one of the best parts about where we are in the world. I mean, 49 years of Roe and it's gone. We are on a precipice of something, I don't know what it's going to be like. I hope it doesn't turn violent. I hope it's not another civil war or whatever. I really pray that that does not happen. But we have an opportunity here to lead boldly and lead well and draw people into the way of wisdom, which is drawing people towards our God. So now, with all that said, let's look at 1 Chronicles 12. So 1 Chronicles 12, interesting passage here. This is coming at the very end of the reign of Saul. In fact, Saul is dead. You remember King Saul? He was the first king of Israel. He's dead now by the time this passage rolls around. And it's describing all of the people who are coming to David. Now, we know from other passages of Scripture, Chronicles tends to gloss over some of the wrinkles and warts of the historical record. But we know from other passages of Scripture, when Saul died and his prominent sons died with him, Jonathan, for example, he had another son named Ishbosheth, who was made king of the northern 10 tribes for about 2 years. He wasn't really able to keep it together, and then he got assassinated, and then the 10 tribes came down to Judah and asked David to be their king as well. So the transition of power from Saul to David is actually kind of a messy thing that took a while to finally consolidate David's reign over Israel, over all of Israel. And so what Chronicles is telling us here is about that time period, about the time when David began to take control of the kingdom. And if we skip down here, you will see, beginning in verse 23, you will see the people who were coming to join him. And I think it's really interesting. So it starts with Judah. The men of Judah bearing shield and spear were 6,800 armed troops. The Simeonites, they sent 7,100 men of valor. Levites sent 4,600. The prince of Jehoiada, the house of Aaron with him, 3,700. Zadok came as well. Of the Benjaminites, which is really weird, the kinsmen of Saul, 3,000 came as well. Ephraimites, 20,000 mighty men. So the tribes of Israel here are sending warriors to David to fight with him, right? And then in verse 32, of the men of Issachar, who had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do, 200 chiefs and all their kinsmen under their command. Issachar sticks out. You know what Issachar is famous for? Neither do I. No idea. But this passage, Issachar sticks out. Because everybody else is looking at this time of crisis, this opportunity, this man who had, as a teenager, been anointed king of Israel. He was supposed to rule over Israel and had been running from the previous king for more than a decade. David becomes king of Israel when he is 30. It takes 2 more years before he finally consolidates power. And so there is this massive time of crisis. There are people who want to see David put on the throne where he belongs, as he was anointed by Samuel and chosen by God to be the king of Israel. And there are people who are still loyal to Saul and want to see a descendant of Saul, Ishbosheth, become the king. And so tribes are sending warriors to David to be on David's side. And Issachar just says, we're going to send you 200 guys. But the 200 guys aren't just any guys. They're not just guys who are coming in with swords and spears or whatever. They're not just warriors. These are guys who understand the times and know what to do. This is what we need right now in our culture. More young men and women who can really understand what's going on and help us to decide what is the best course of action for any host of issues, be they church matters or state matters. It doesn't matter. We need young people of wisdom who can lead, who will understand what's going on and can tell us what to do. And in the light of an army of thousands, you only need a few hundred of these people, right? You don't need a huge number. You just have to find the right ones. And that is pretty exciting. There we go. So Core Academy of Science nurtures the next generation of faithful Christ-like creation researchers to explore the hardest problems in creation. We are all about raising up bold leaders. We are all about finding those talented, influential individuals, the men of Issachar, if you will, women as well, who understand the times, can learn the times, and then begin to start telling us, this is what we need to be thinking about. This is where we need to go. This is how we ought to react in this situation. It is a great need in our culture and in our church. And it is a genuine privilege to be able to work with these young people on many different things. We work on, if you're wondering, some of the things we work on, I'm working with a young man who just graduated high school. We are working on human fossils and the human fossil record. We'll be going to the Smithsonian this summer, looking at their fossil casts that they have there. We have individuals working on geological questions. We have individuals working on questioning and testing whether evolution fits the fossil record or whether something else does. We have many people doing many different things, and we're working with lots of friends and partners through our retreats and through our Sanders Scholarship Fund, which provides funding for professors to help mentor their students. So it is a terrific privilege. There we go. So if you'd like to learn more about what we're doing, you can check out those website addresses. And I would be remiss if I didn't tell you, we are 85% donor driven. So, do visit that corsi.org/donate link. We'd very much appreciate that. But yeah, there it is. I mean, we are looking to draw people into the way of wisdom. We are looking to break people out of simple black and white thinking and get them into not a world of grays. That's wrong, is just as much wrong as total black and white, but recognize there's messiness and that sometimes we need to think more deeply and more carefully about God's creation and about the situations in which we find ourselves in order to find the right and good path forward. And I'm glad to see a lot of good things are happening, and I'm glad to see that there's still much opportunity for our students to make a big impact in this world of Christianity and science, and in this world of hard problems. I should also mention, you can find us, I hate to say this, but you can find us on social media. Be careful using social media, but you can find us there. You might also come across our podcast, Let's Talk Creation. If you don't listen to Let's Talk Creation, it's quite a hoot. I have a great time recording it. We talk to experts on just a bunch of different issues. Sometimes we'll just talk among ourselves. I host it with a man named Paul Garner. He is a researcher and speaker at Biblical Creation Trust in England. So it's a really interesting international mix of people. And so if you like podcasts, which I understand people do, I was never a podcast guy until I started it, and suddenly everyone's like, you have a podcast? That's amazing. I had no idea. But if you like podcasts, Let's Talk Creation. There's our podcast. All right, I see by the clock on the table here that it is just about the hour. Is that good to stop? All right, great. Then let me pray for us all and thank God for his blessings and guidance.